is this morning expected to continue giving testimony at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. And among the issues that he's expected to be quizzed about are the details around his CR17 ANC Presidential Campaign ahead of the party's Nasrec conference in 2017. Now, in his testimony yesterday, President Ramaphosa acknowledged that the ANC had not done enough to deal with the phenomenon of state capture when it first reared its head. Now, Ramaphosa has also defended the cadre deployment policy of the governing party, and he says that there was nothing wrong with it in principle, but that a balance needs to be struck between establishing a professional public service and delivering what he says is the ANC's developmental mandate. Now, Qaanitah Hunter, News 24's political editor and author of the book Balance of Power, Ramaphosa and the Future of South Africa, joins us now. Qaanitah, good to see you again. Good morning. Thanks for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Thank you very much for having me.
What would you say was the key takeaway for you from Ramaphosa's evidence at the Commission yesterday?
I think that it was unsurprising that Ramaphosa conceded to a lot of things that happened during the years of state capture, that factionalism, careerism, fueled corruption within ANC ranks. That was not something new. The ANC has been saying that. But I think that it was the lack of detail that for me, stood out in the first day of testimony. I know that there's an expectation that today when he appears and then when he appears later in May as President of the Republic, they will go down to specifics. But I do think that that's where the detail is very important. How much did you know on very specific things, whether it is the decimation of Eskom, for example, whether it is, the Guptas instructing the president to fire certain ministers. How much did the then deputy president know, and how much has the ANC, learned from that and put in measures in place to prevent that? I think that was very interesting, Sakina, when DCJ Raymond Zondo asked the president, what measures can the ANC put in place? Because that has to be the key recommendation of the Zondo Commission, to say, okay, something didn't work in the ANC's deployment strategy, for example, because you saw the systemic failures in Eskom and in all SOEs, for example. So what can you do differently? And I think that was where the president sort of hesitated in responding.
And speaking to some of the sort of specifics from yesterday's testimony, when we look at Bosasa, for example, and question around the ANC's knowledge of what was going on there, the president saying, well, basically, they didn't know, but then saying the ANC should have known. But then, did you feel that the line of questioning was strong enough, given what we are dealing with and how this really plays into that state capture that is being probed?
Yes, I think the strategy, it appears from the Commission, is to sort of just get a broad framework of, what are we working with? Considering that this testimony that the President presented yesterday is the testimony of the ANC. That's why the ANC's top six, or a few of them, accompanied the President to the State Capture Commission, because he was sort of representing the entire party. And it's not his personal evidence as Cyril Ramaphosa. But definitely, it was scant on detail, and I think that is what the Commission, is hoping to build on to say, specifically in this meeting when they had that meeting with the Guptas, for example, or even if you just compared this testimony to when ANC Chairperson Gwede Mantashe testified, it was a lot more specific, and so that's I think that is going to be very important to see how far the Commission pushes the president today in answering specific details, because I pointed out in a column this morning, Sakina, that it was never a fault of President Cyril Ramaphosa to state the obvious. He has no qualms about saying yes, there's corruption in our ranks, or yes, we failed. That's something that he sort of built his political career upon, shouting, yes, the house is burning, But when it comes to, investigating who are the arsonists, or actually, now trying to rebuild the house once the fire is put off, there's almost this hesitance, and there's this sort of, reliance on constantly shouting, the house was burnt down instead of actually rebuilding it. And I think that that the success of the Zondo Commission would be to not only diagnose the problem, but also to recommend, viable solutions so that you don't have a governing party repeat the devastation that we've seen in the state capture years.
How far, realistically, though, can this commission go in terms of establishing that? Because this is something that the African National Congress needs to deal with. And surely this is not about rectifying or looking at the shortcomings of the ANC's constitution or the inability of the African National Congress to hold its members to account where they fall short. This is about getting to the bottom of state capture and about getting to know who was responsible, as you say, for what, who the arsonists were, who set the house on fire.
Yeah, but I mean, there's an interesting assertion made by Advocate Paul Pretorius, is that perhaps, the commission is looking at, for example, the ANC's cadre deployment strategy or policy and say, perhaps those type of things facilitated state capture. And so how then do you root out patronage, for example, in the ANC? How do you put in foolproof measures? Again, it appears that the ANC is almost outsourcing its renewal and reformation process to the Zondo Commission, when Ramaphosa said repeatedly to the Commission, this is for you to recommend. We're waiting for you to give us the answers. And I think that shouldn't be the case. Obviously, the ANC is, putting its hopes on its, step-aside policy. Again, what the president conceded is very true, in that there's a huge disconnect between what the party resolves and what the party actually practices. And you see it over and over and over again. And I think that that's why the commission today, at least, should move away from the ideological framework, perhaps, if you like, or the theoretical framework, and go down to the specifics. Okay, you've had this deployment committee in the appointment of a Brian Molefe. What happened in this particular regard? How was he nominated to parliament? So and I think that we will not get proper answers if the specifics are not drilled down to. And I think that it's important to also note that there's a big expectation that when President Ramaphosa appears as president of the Republic, he then can speak to issues around the capture of state-owned enterprises, etc. But right now, he's speaking on behalf of the ANC, and as the ANC goes, he's defended the ANC's cadre deployment strategy.
And on that, on this cadre deployment, as you will, Ramaphosa reiterated basically what Gwede Mantashe said at the commission previously, saying that it measures the measures that the ANC has put in place to manage and ensure the developmental agenda is actually realized, is what basically drives this deployment strategy. But shouldn't the crux be on whether or not the ANC finds that this has exposed the country to very narrow political ends and has essentially failed the country, given how these factional battles in the ANC have now become front and center?
Yeah, and the ANC and the president relied on, whataboutism, because, look at the DA. There's, the DA does it the same way, for example. And then also, taking it to the international stage and, quoting a paper from the OECD and saying that, the use of party cadres is a very well-known thing and a very well-known practice, but you just have to regulate it in terms of the efficiency of the state. But the criticism that I would come with is that you've been doing this for 27 years. It has failed you, whether it's on a national level, a provincial level, or and more so rather, one can argue, on a local government level. It has failed. And so while in theory, it makes sense to say that, the party has to appoint people who have this developmental agenda. You cannot just appoint people in terms, the president says, you can't just appoint people on the basis of the economy because his grandmother in Limpopo would have not had electricity. It makes sense. But what happens in a world where you had the abuse of this developmental agenda, where whole-scale looting happened in the name of transformation? What do you do then? Obviously, you have to go back to the drawing board and say, perhaps we've had good intentions with this strategy of ours, but perhaps it needs to change because it definitely was perverted in the process. How then did you have the appointments of certain boards of parastatals that really absolutely looted those entities? And so, there has to be a concession that, yes, we've been doing this for 27 years. Maybe we thought it made sense in terms of, the developmental agenda and having people who are, friendly with the liberation movement rather, but now things have to change, and maybe there has to be a set criteria, or we need to have an external advisory group coming in and advising ANC ministers when they're making appointments. But one can understand that these type of appointments are never clear cut, but you've seen it over and over and over again. As the Commission pointed out very clearly, the case of the municipal manager in the Amatole municipality, where the person was clearly not qualified for the job, and yet the ANC had instructed the caucus and instructed the interviewing panel that they should appoint the person who was clearly less competent, and as a result, it was taken to court, and the court had said this can't be democracy. If what the party says goes, if clearly the person that you are appointing is not fit for purpose. Again, the president doesn't doesn't defend that, and concedes that we need to appoint people who are not close only to the ANC but close to the country. He says the right things, but clearly the president knows and the ANC knows that something was wrong, and that that there was definitely a disconnect in practice.
So this raises the question of, do you think that the president was rather evasive in some instances? The example that you just mentioned, there was also, for example, the question about what the ANC knew or did not know or should have known around Bosasa, for example, and then also the continuous dismal performance of boards of state-owned entities and ANC deployments in this regard, including to entities such as Transnet, Denel, PRASA, Eskom, SAA, and the DCJ adding that there was a common thread when it comes to these SOE boards. How did you find, would you evaluate the president's response to this question?
I think the word is evasive, Sakina, and I think that it bounced back to the initial point that I made, is that the president constantly states the obvious and constantly concedes to wrongdoing, or so that it sort of gives him a cover not to answer the very specific things. So when it comes to, for example, the Bosasa funding, the president would say, the ANC will not take money from corrupt people, and the ANC distances itself from companies who are involved in corrupt activities. Okay, how did you take money from Bosasa? Then there's sort of again, a utopian or an ideal world, response. Not a very specific one to say there was already an SIU report at the time. The Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services was essentially told to ignore that SIU report on Bosasa, and the party just constantly benefited from it. And so I really, really hope that today we would see some level of specific questions being posed to the president as they lead his evidence as president of the republic, and that so you can almost get a sense of who the president believes is this proverbial arsonist, and how he actually is going to fix the situation as president of the country. Because again, it's not enough for the ANC to fold its hands and say, we're complying with the Zondo Commission, we're outsourcing our renewal to this commission. No, it has to want to change things. It has to want to see the flaws in its deployment policy and realize that it is not foolproof and that actually it had been perverted by people who wanted to loot the state and who had looted the state. And what can we do differently?
And before I let you go, Qaanitah, just a quick one on the suspension of Cyril Ramaphosa. Sure, you've been following this one as well. So what's your take on that? And what can we expect, given that one does not really expect Cyril to just, go away quietly and roll over and play dead, as it were?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an important one, particularly because of the power Cyril Ramaphosa once wielded in the ANC in the Northwest. You remember something called the Premier League once before, how strong those provincial leaders were of the ANC. Obviously, he has already scoffed at the interim provincial committee that was set up, led by Qaanitah, who've now effectively suspended him. It is quite interesting that his sentence includes being mentoring by former President Thabo Mbeki for a few years. He's obviously allowed to appeal that sentence. I think that he probably will. But you already see, the likes of ANC chairperson Gwede Mantashe saying to people like Cyril Ramaphosa, who have contradicted the ANC in relation to the step-aside policy and in relation to his disciplinary, to say, if you don't agree with the ANC resolutions, you're free to leave the party. And so you're definitely going to see a lot more noise from Cyril Ramaphosa. And I think that there is a sense that, who actually is the ANC in the Northwest. And when you have these interim structures, it's very easy to cause chaos and confusion among party rank and file.
Qaanitah Hunter, thank you so much. And that's News 24 political editor and author of the book, A Balance of Power, Ramaphosa and the Future of South Africa. And we were talking there about President Cyril Ramaphosa's testimony at the Zondo Commission yesterday, which will, of course, continue today on day 2, starting at 9 a.m. Time now for Leanne to get